My name is Madeline Cruz, and I'm from Housing and Climate Justice for Acton, and I'm also co-chair of the Human Resources Committee in town. Tonight's a very important night because we get to ask our candidates for the Select Board questions that we may desire to get to know who we want to vote for. I want to thank Bob for asking Housing and Climate Justice for Acton to be here and sponsor this event, and our candidates and our public as well. Housing and Climate Justice for Acton is an organization of renters and condo owners. Our mission is to help as many residents that need in town and have their voices heard. We've accomplished some very important things, like we got the Select Board to allocate $30,000 into hiring a renter's advocate because it is needed, and it's not just for renters or condo owners. It's important for the public to know that it's also for homeowners. Sometimes homeowners face challenges, and their homes can be foreclosed, and having a renter's advocate can help. We would be using a Malden and Somerville model. Another thing that we got accomplished was last year we got one of our warrant article that passed, and was EV charging station for all. And we've had other things that I can't come to mind right now because I didn't write anything down, but I think for the most part getting the point across of how important it is to continue advocating for those that need us to help them out and make a difference in our world. I know that change is hard, and not a lot of people understand change because it's not welcomed all the time, but I want to remind everyone that in order to make change, we have to make movement. And in order to make movement, we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to acknowledge and take accountability when things go wrong. And it's not about criticizing, it's not about putting somebody down. It's about uniting our voices and saying, change is needed, and coming up with a solution so that everyone has a safe space to live at, because it's a human right. So with this, I now leave you with Bob Van Meter. Thank you.
This is where we ask you to press the little red button so the TV can hear you.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you, Joanne. So we thank Housing and Climate Justice for Acton joining us in sponsoring this important discussion of one of the most significant issues facing our community, and thank the candidates for all agreeing to be here this evening, and our moderator, Joanne Berry, who serves as the town moderator, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows. Anyway, Acton Housing for All formed about 5 years ago. We were assisted in our initial work by Citizens Housing and Planning Association, which sought to create venues for citizens in suburban communities to kind of speak up for housing, and we've been trying to do that for the ensuing 5 years. We're a group of residents and other allies, and we've supported a number of efforts to put resources into affordable housing and commit sites for affordable housing, and we're proud that we've helped some important new housing developments proceed that will provide affordable housing for elderly and disabled people in the community. And we are very supportive of the MBTA community's provisions and look forward to working with the town on those. As well, we have some other policy priorities, and we've welcomed the chance to work with Housing and Climate Justice for Acton to support renter protections that they've advocated. moderator, Joanne Barry, will go over the format for the evening. I think most of you got note cards and pencils, which we'd be happy to have your questions, and we'll try and accommodate as many of those as we can after some of the prepared questions. So thanks very much for coming tonight, and thank you, Joanne.
Thank you for asking me to participate in this forum. I'm sure as everyone in this room and watching knows, housing is not only an urgent issue in our community, but it is across our Commonwealth and across the nation. So I'm glad that we're discussing this here tonight. So the format will be, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement. Our timer is right here. And he'll flail about or something. Oh, he has some signs, good, to let you know how time is going. So each person will have a 3-minute opening. We do have a series of questions. Each candidate has up to 3 minutes to respond. Not necessary to use all of that time if you've said what you need to say. And then we'll look to see what questions we have from the audience, and then we'll finish up with some closing. So I look forward to learning more. Okay, opening statements. Alyssa.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Housing and Climate Justice for Acton and Housing for All, Acton Housing for All. There are many chapters around the country for organizing the event, and thank you to the town moderator for volunteering her time to moderate the event, and all of you who are here in person or watching on TV or watching the recording later on for being here. My name is Alyssa Nickel, and obviously I'm a candidate for Select Board. I decided to run for Select Board because a few years ago, about 5 years ago, I discovered how much of an impact my local government makes on the town, on the lives of the residents, and also how much of an impact, positive or less so, the volunteers and officials make on the efficiency and the transparency and the good decision-making of the government. So I began volunteering, and I started with the Community Preservation Committee, and now I also volunteer on the Open Space Committee and the Historical Commission. And I thought I would start talking first because I know that we're going to hear a lot of words like crisis and urgent and problem as we discuss the need for affordable housing in town. So I thought I would start by being a little bit more positive to begin with, because I think that Acton is a community that is committed to affordable housing, and it has been so for a long time. We have 2 affordable housing entities that are official, I suppose you should say, the Acton Housing Authority and the Acton Community Housing Corporation. And we also have these non-governmental organizations like Housing for All and Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. So it's very clear that the town and the community is committed to providing affordable housing and resolving these issues. In fact, we have 30% of our housing stock is multifamily, and that's actually higher than any of the comparison communities. So when we look at our housing production plan, there are some communities that the state compares Acton to based on a number of factors, including size, population, form of government, and we have a significantly higher stock of multifamily housing, which tends to be more affordable than single-family housing. We also have 2,000 rental units that are actually affordable to people at 80%, 50%, and 30% area median income. So we have something to be proud of in our housing stock, and obviously we have a lot of challenges and a lot of work to do, and it's great to know that the community and the town is committed to that.
you, and thank you to Bob and Joanne and Madeline and Steve and all the organizations that have supported this event tonight. I'm really proud that actually Acton, in the last few years, has started asking questions specifically about housing to candidates, because it is such an important part of our community life and support for people. A few years ago, I was at the train station. I don't know what I was doing, leafleting or taking down license plates to see who was parking there. I mean, I don't do that like a nosy person. I was doing that to see where people were coming from to use the station. And I met a man who got off the train and thought he could walk to Household Goods, but he couldn't. And so I ended up talking to him and giving him a ride there and hearing his story. And I was so moved by the comfort and relief he felt finally being housed. He was going there to get some furniture, and he lived in Cambridge, and he finally had housing after being unhoused for a while. And I'm always thinking about how grateful I am for a warm shower and window shades I can close. And it's just so important that we have that, and not everybody has that. And sometimes when they do, they spend all of their money, and much more than the 30% that's a reasonable amount to spend on housing, to get that and secure and keep that housing. This is part of my interest in general in equity and issues, and I was part of the Acton-Boxborough Diversity Coalition, which later became the Acton-Boxborough United Way Racial Justice Coalition, and all that work just rolled right into more recent intense look and involvement with housing, co-founding with Bob and others, Housing for All, which has worked on the housing production plan, the accessory dwelling units, which are so important. I'll mention all of these things later, supporting the Main Street development. And there are people in the group who work with houseless people, with real estate, with all areas related to housing. And that's been an education for me and for the town. I also was part of forming Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. I am not the main type of person that leads that group, because it centers people who live in multi-unit housing or rent. But as part of the group, I and others walked door to door to every apartment in Acton. We had a kickoff event at Narra Park. We leafleted. We met so many people and created a whole community, a very diverse, in all ways, community of people who then got involved with climate action, with asking for a renter's advocate, with recycling support for multi-unit buildings, with energy savings efforts, with the Article 45 at town meeting, which will make it safer for people to ask for health inspections, and for an EV charging article, on and on. This group, which is being led by renters and people in multi-unit housing, is doing something that's unique in our town. And I just want to say that I'm proud of Acton for supporting this work. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed the last few years of being on the select board. The first couple of years, too many of those meetings were, in Zoom and little windows, but even then, the introduction of Zoom meant we get to have a lot more people participate. One of the things I love about being on the board is a chance to learn from so many people, both my fellow board members and our fine staff, but mostly all citizens who really care about a whole lot of issues. And I've been learning a lot about housing while I've been here. When I joined the board, it was because a couple of strong environmental advocates were leaving the board, and I thought there needed to be room for, sort of informed environmental advocacy. But as I spent more time on the board, what I realized is that all these issues are so interconnected, and they go back to deep historical roots. When I think about housing, I think about Acton as a town for its first couple hundred years, where a very working class town, and people lived where they lived and could afford it. There wasn't a lot of homelessness. There wasn't a lot of problems with being able to afford houses back in the 20s and earlier. And then Acton started becoming a suburb. And what that meant was, among other things, that there was a rush for home ownership. And that rush was not done equitably. For one thing, all that strong, the GI Bill and a GI Bill that was helping to fund mortgages for people for owning their first houses wasn't available to black families. It's just the banks would refuse, and the Federal Housing Administration made it a policy. So we also then, after that, created zoning that was designed to keep out people who were not as well off. We created a lot of zoning that had, 2-acre minimums. That's a lot of land to have to buy in order to put up one little house. And it's created between those two factors, it's created a situation of Acton becoming increasingly dominated by well-off people. And we can fix that slowly but surely. It's the role of the select board to reflect the will of the people in creating a community that we all want to live in. And part of the community that we all want to live in is a community that's welcoming and diverse to people of different races and different incomes. And housing is the key, is one of the keys to making that possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Here's our first question. As we know, in early 2021, Massachusetts passed a new law that requires all communities served by the MBTA to create zoning districts that allow multifamily housing by right. Acton is required under the law and the subsequent regulations to rezone an area of at least 50 acres where 750 units of multifamily housing can eventually be developed, an average of 15 units per housing acre. Do you support the town of Acton implementing zoning to comply with the MBTA communities law? And what would be your approach to identifying where the town of Acton should implement by right zoning for multifamily dwelling? Luckily, you've seen this question. They're good questions, but they're a little bit long, and hopefully you all got that. So, Franny, you may go first.
I am very happy that we have this law, and I'm hoping that we can abide by the law peacefully and excitedly as a town. What the law says is that we need to have 50 acres of newly zoned multi-unit housing. It doesn't matter what's there now, and it doesn't make so someone has to do anything different with their land, but it means that in the future someone could do something different with the land. As a member of the Transportation Committee, I was invited to be on the South Acton Village Advisory Group, and we have been participating with the Planning Department to, did you say 1 or 2 minutes to respond? Oh, 3. Okay. It's like a Cadillac. As part of the work, the Planning Department has been leading us through public engagement. They had a wonderful event for a few days in the library where people came and they looked at maps and they put stickies in the walls and they really looked at where we should consider rezoning. I want to see us take this law up. 10 of the acres have to be within half a mile of the station. The other 40 could be anywhere in Acton. But going through this group process and working with the planners and looking at the input that we got from people, it seems very doable and not as scary as one might think. You might picture suddenly you'll have high-rise apartment buildings. Right across from Discovery Museum is a little set of houses that is about the level of density that could come from this. It has to be on an average of 15 units per acre, but there it's, I don't remember if it's somewhere between 9 and 12. I don't remember how many it is, but that's an average throughout the town. So you could have in other places bigger ones. What did that sign say? Oh, thank you. Okay. I don't have my long distance glasses with me, so it passed quickly. I would like to see affordable inclusionary zoning as part of what we do. I would like us to not do token zoning where we find a place that was just built, and if we make it now zoned for multi-unit, it's going to be another 50 years. I also want to make sure that we abide by, and we really study water zoning areas, and that we don't zone for multi-unit where there's a multi-unit house that have a lot of people who have naturally affordable housing in it now who might be displaced if the owner decides to take advantage of that new power. So I think there's a lot we can do, and I'm excited about seeing it happen.
Yes. No. I'm happy so far with the approach that the town has taken. I think melding a search for how to do compliance with a real search for doing planning for the South Acton Village is exactly right. So having the South Acton Village Planning Group is, I think, exactly the right step. What I'd hope to see after that is, a series of public forums so we can all, absorb the information and the recommendations and give feedback on it and develop it into something. So the number of acres in Acton right now where you can, by right, put up multifamily housing is 0. So we have a long way to go, and I'm looking forward to this change. I agree that it is unfortunate that the way the law is written doesn't require inclusionary zoning, that is requiring a certain percentage of these units to be, forever affordable, but at least it does allow for that. So I hope Acton takes a strong position on creating inclusionary zoning in this, in these 50 acres of newly rezoned land.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to be honest that as much as I admire the work of all of our state legislators, they are doing a great job working on our behalf. I'm not generally supportive of one-size-fits-all legislation, and that's what this MBTA zoning is. I don't think, though, that the question is necessarily the right question to ask, because does anybody support this law? It is really irrelevant because we must comply with the law. I think it's unfortunate that Chapter 40B, which was enacted in 1969, 54 years ago, did not solve the housing crisis. And it's unfortunate that Acton has gotten really close to the 10% subsidized housing inventory that would allow us a little bit more control over what gets built here and where, without fear of a developer being denied an application and appealing to the state, and then to have this legislation come down. It's not really fair to compare a community like Nahant to Lowell, or a community like Acton to Worcester. Yes, we have an MBTA train station, It just happens to be in the oldest part of town where there's a historic district, there's wetlands, there's a river, there's MBTA-owned land there. So I was really happy with all of the changes that were made through the rules and regulation and the public comment period that allowed for 40 of those acres, or 80%, to be somewhere else in town, because a lot of communities struggled with compliance because one size doesn't really fit all. So I think that the process that I would support is exactly the process that the town has been following. I'm really happy to see on the working group, there are representatives from the Economic Development Committee, from the Historic District Commission, from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Commission, because I think that having all of those voices represented, sitting around the table, is really crucial to make some good decisions. I'm happy with the survey. It was really well responded to. We got at least 1,000 responses to that survey. The open houses at the library were well attended. I was disappointed that there weren't any in the evening, so I hope that the next public forum that's planned for June is going to be after the dinner hour so more people can come, as well as one that's during the daytime. And in terms of where this should be located, I think that the working group has already selected a great location. They've avoided the historic districts. They've avoided streets that have old historic homes that aren't protected by being in the historic district, and they've put acres, or preliminarily put acres around other parts of town that I think are rational. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question. Acton is currently below the 10% level, so is subject to the provisions of Chapter 40B, which allows developments with 25% of the homes are affordable to override local zoning restrictions. If some currently proposed developments advance, we will be above the 10% threshold and cannot count on increases in affordable homes through the 40B development process. Would you support the enactment of an inclusionary zoning bylaw requiring that 10% of all the homes and developments above a specific threshold, for example, greater than 8 units, should be affordable? Jim?
Yes. But let me say something else as well. First, about 40B. It was sometimes a crude instrument that resulted in houses that were, not pleasing to residents, but it was the only game in town. It was the only way to get affordable housing in town, other than the long and expensive process of building it ourselves. So I'm glad it was there. I'm glad we, at least have some affordable houses. But I think this inclusionary zoning approach is very powerful, especially combined with if we actually have multifamily, development by right, then to know that we're going to get some affordable units out of that is very exciting. I wish it could be more than 10%, though I do realize that there's a math game that happens there, right? So if you require too high of a percentage, then you discourage development of these multifamily homes, which defeats the purpose of having inclusionary zoning. So 10% may be the magic number. I don't know, but it's a good start.
Thank you. I definitely support any affordability requirements that the town or the state can implement to increase the possibility of people being able to find homes that they can afford. I didn't mention this for the first question, but for the MBTA zoning, absolutely. I hope that Acton includes a requirement. The highest allowed is 10% of those units to be affordable. It is disappointing that that wasn't a requirement that came in the actual legislation itself, but it's left up to the communities. But I think Acton is committed to affordable housing. Also, even though we will eventually get to 10% housing on our subsidized housing inventory, which is what the state mandates with Chapter 40B, there's absolutely not going to be an end to Chapter 40B housing. Our Acton Community Housing Corporation is committed to continuing to work with Chapter 40B developers. I think that there's real opportunity for some public-private partnerships. For instance, we are looking for someone to take number 3, number 9, and number 13 School Street right now and do something wonderful, hopefully a mixed-use development, and we have a proposal right now. But the town is in a really unique position here because we already own 2 of the 3 parcels. So we have a lot of leverage that I hope we can take advantage of if we worked together with a 40B developer to, maintain some parking for the church that's next door, had some housing and made sure that 25% of it was affordable. Then I think we could also encourage them to do some commercial, because you can't lose all of the parking and have the commercial entity be viable. So I'd like to see the town do some more public-private partnerships. I'd also like to see the town meeting bring to fruition, if it's economically feasible, a rehab housing trust, because I think inclusionary zoning, it's affordability, but I think that we also need to think about who we're taking care of. And the people that live in town currently are at risk. So an average of 40 units per year in the town sells for under $200,000, and a rehab housing trust, if it was in existence, would be able to purchase those units, renovate them and rehab them to state standards, deed restrict them so that they remain affordable in perpetuity, and then they could either be sold or rented by either the trust or another entity in town. So we have a lot of options besides just inclusionary zoning and Chapter 40B, and I think the town should continue to take advantage of all of them.
Thank you. Yes, I'm in favor of inclusionary zoning, and I hope I would also like, I agree with everything the other candidates said. I do hope that we can do more than just the 10%. I mean, if about a third of our town, or even more, is low income, then it's not enough to only have 10% affordable units. It would be nice if we could answer more of the housing needs, especially people who work here in the town, the 10,000-ish people who work in town or not for the town, all could benefit. Many of them cannot afford to live here. And so I absolutely like the idea of including inclusionary zoning in our plan. Like Jim said, there's often a cutoff point where it's not worth it for a developer to build. And so I would like to find other ways of funding. I like the idea of private partnerships, and also just funding, having that housing fund, not just for fixing up houses and renting them, but also for helping to bring units that might not be affordable into affordability to people, or for helping developers be able to build. You know, if they could build 20% if they got some financial help. So yes, I am for it. It's interesting that the 25% affordable that comes with 40Bs sort of has a downside in that we keep getting housing built, and we lost a lot of trees and open space in order to get that housing built, in order to get that 25% affordable. It would be nice if we somehow could use present buildings, present developments, and infill to get some of that 10% or 20%. I think I'm going to stop there, but I definitely am in favor of inclusionary zoning, and that's something that Housing for All has felt is next on our plate to look at.
Thank you. Next question. Over the last 2 years, Housing and Climate Justice for Acton has advocated for the creation of a tenant advocate position, in part because of the challenges that renters have faced during the pandemic in both accessing emergency rental assistance and in getting repairs made by their landlords. Do you support the town helping tenants, whether it be by hiring a permanent tenant advocate or contracting with an entity that will supply Acton tenants with tenant advocacy services? Alyssa.
Thank you. I do support this effort that is being led by Housing and Climate Justice for Acton, and I participated, as did the other candidates, in that door knocking, and it was really eye-opening to hear stories from renters, and also through the Racial Justice Collaborative. We had one quarterly meeting where there were a lot of renters or condo owners, apartment dwellers who came to the meeting to tell their stories. And it's really frustrating to hear so many stories from folks who can't get their needs met, whether it's a hand railing or water pressure in their sink, and the landlord tells them to wash their dishes in the bathtub, anything that's unreasonable. And I just read recently that Boston has actually, the Attorney General, so I guess maybe it's the entire state, last year they heard more tenant-landlord complaints in that year than in the history of, I guess, the office taking those complaints. So I'm not sure if it's because people are no longer tolerating conditions and they're bringing the courage to address them, or if the pandemic and people struggling to pay rent and landowners not getting rent, if that created some inability to adequately address these needs. And I don't know exactly what led to that, but I think that the government has a place to support people who are vulnerable. And I'm very pleased that the Select Board allocated ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding to get this going. And I think that one elegant solution to the issue of do we really want to support just one group of people was to make this advocate available to both landlords and renters, because I think that tenants and landlords have issues depending on the relationship and the situation. So that would be something that I'd be in favor of making it available to both landlords and tenants. And I also think that a fiscally responsible or feasible way to do it might be to have it be a regionalized service, just like we do with Regional Housing Services Office. We get a lot of expert assistance from them because they're serving 8 or 9 other communities, and it's a good value for the town. So that's another option for us.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, I don't know where the best place to stick it in, but it relates to getting help for renters, is that there were a couple of changes in state government recently. Governor Healy announced supportive housing funding awards to help some of the problems that the pandemic brought around. And one of the things it did was it included bringing 317 more homes for residents with very low incomes. So that would be very helpful. And also, the legislature just this week advanced a bill to create an executive office of housing and livable communities. So it's being raised to a cabinet-level position. All that said, we are in a state environment that can help people with rental issues. And yes, I definitely support the rental advocate. It came up first at that kickoff event at Narrow Park that I mentioned that Housing and Climate Justice for Acton had, and hearing all the people's housing issues, in addition to the climate issues that we had first come together on, made it completely evident that there was more support that was needed to come from the town. And I thought that was an excellent idea that was proposed right at that original event, and I support having it either come from the town or from an outside organization. Whatever it is, in the same way as communities get together and get housing support from the regional housing office and other collaborative work that happens, I think having help for people is really important. I mean, time and again, I speak to people, and I think I agree, it's not just, it's sometimes landlords that can't afford to fix something, but renters and landlords get into such stressful situations. I mean, one thing breaking, one problem, and it's just sort of paralyzing. And people shouldn't have to have that extra stress. So anything the town can do, including this permanent tenant advocate, is an important step that I would support. We want to show that the town is here for people so that they feel taken care of, they feel they can communicate. There have been some funding programs that started during the pandemic and have gone on that are important, and they're a start, but it's always so piecemeal. I want people to feel wholly taken care of, and you don't have to fix this crisis and then that crisis and then wait for the next one. Thanks.
It's been great to see the beginnings of, effective renter advocacy in Acton. It's come a long way, but it has a long way to go. A few points about that. I was very pleased when the town created the hotline during the COVID times. It was originally conceived as a COVID hotline, but it turns out that having a single number for people to call that have urgent questions is a really good idea that we hadn't implemented before then. And then we agreed to have that number also be the same number that was advertised to provide services for renters. And that brought together a team of staff in different departments who, share different areas of, how to deal with renters' concerns, from the Board of Health to the Human Services, to the engineering, to, all the different departments that have some role in helping out. The big area that is unsupported and underfunded is legal help. And that's increasingly important, especially as more and more landlords are not, local people anymore. They are large corporations, often from out of state, who are buying up apartments as a financial strategy. And part of that financial strategy requires, or seems to require, a deliberate ignoring of renters' needs in order to extract the last dollar to pay for all the loans that they had to take to buy all these apartments in the first place. So having effective legal support would be a great extra step that I hope a rental advocacy program could provide. A model that's in some other towns is, regular hours where there are lawyers and paralegals available for people to come and talk to, either on the phone or right in person to get things resolved. I think that would be a wonderful way to spend some of the town's money. And could be a great supplement to what we're doing already. The Acton, like a lot of suburbs, has a history of treating renters as second-class citizens, that they're sort of here temporarily, they're here to, to do things for us. It's a really important important attitude to recognize. It's also a really dangerous attitude. And raising the needs of renter services up is a way of countering that kind of thinking. You know, like when I think of when people stand up at town meeting and always start their comments by how many years they've spent in Acton, it's that same game. It's that same game of saying, you know, well, I've got deep roots here, I own here, you need to listen to me. And the flip side of that is, well, if I'm renting here, you don't listen to me. We got to change that.
Thank you. Next question. In terms of improving both the health and the quality of life for Acton tenants, what steps would you take to, this is a multi-part, 1, respond to mold in multifamily housing in Acton? 2, would you make it a priority to see to it that the Board of Health has the tools to implement and enforce recycling and composting at apartment complexes? And finally, do you support requiring apartment complexes to offer a reasonable amount of EV or electrical vehicle chargers to their residents? So mold, Board of Health, and chargers. Franny.
I definitely think mold is an important thing to respond to and make sure that people have steps in place that they can take if they have mold. The first year I lived in Acton, I rented a duplex, and there was mold in the basement that used to crunch as you walked across it, and my asthma, which previously had been unnoticeable, flared up while living in that place. And so I really can feel for people who suffer from having mold. I think that sort of providing a safer way for people to get inspections that Article 45 does at town meeting is one step. I think education of landlords as well as the tenants on the mold issue is important, and including state health agencies and collaborative work with other towns, because this isn't something that's just in Acton. When it comes to recycling and composting, yes, I think it's important. I don't think it should fall just on the Board of Health. I think that the town could play a role. The town could help with the recycling and composting efforts, either through transportation or through training and education. I think it could be a community builder in some of the multi-unit developments to develop infrastructure for recycling and composting. And I think it can be multiple departments, not just health, but the sustainability director, economic development also. So I love the idea of working on that, not making it difficult for people who live in those developments to recycle and compost. And the EV chargers, I support it now. I supported it at our last town meeting, that we wanted to support helping complexes find a way to put in EV chargers. I think we're on a wave of electrification, and we're going to have bumps in the road, and we need to do it all together. Private houses, the rental units, and the town buildings, I think we share, and with the electric companies. I think we all have to work together and see how things change and how the technology develops. But it definitely is something that we shouldn't forget about the rental units as we do this. It's important for them to be able to purchase and use electric vehicles.
Thanks. Mold. I think the state laws are already in a good place. So I think Article 45, which directs the select board to work with the Board of Health to clarify to landlords and tenants the legal order of things, so that the worst case scenario is that Landlords are told that an inspector is coming even before there's been a problem identified, and then can turn around and, retaliate or hassle tenants for bringing in an inspector. That's got to stop. The next one was about recycling and composting. So recycling, the state had, one of the issues that stops recycling in apartment complexes is a lack of effective education. You have multilingual communities, you need to have multilingual communication and also visual communication to explain, what goes where, because those rules change. And the problem has happened is that apartments have sometimes offered recycling and then have been told by their trash haulers that they can't accept their recycling anymore because there's too much contamination, there's too much trash in there. So that's just a matter of education. The state has some good educational materials. We need to figure out how we can get town involved in getting those into the hands of, apartment dwellers and mandate it for apartments. The last thing about chargers. So new multifamily housing, when we finally have it, is pretty well taken care of. The new electrical code is going to require 10% at least availability of chargers in new multifamily housing. And the specialized stretch code, which is Article 12 at the upcoming town meeting, is going to require 20%. These are steps in the right direction. But for a lot of people for at-home charging in an apartment building, what's really needed is a technology that I haven't really seen yet, which is plain old level 1 charging, which is just, you plug in your car to a regular outdoor outlet, that is done in such a way that can be, billed to the user. It's been a search by our sustainability director to try to find a solution so that, because it's pretty inexpensive to put in, regular circuits, but without any way of knowing who's using the charger, it's hard to, charge back the costs. So we got to solve a technical problem, and then we can get to work on the, the carrots and sticks to make it happen.
Thank you. I think that to address mold and other health issues with the Board of Health and the Health Department in town is going to require some support of the Health Department. One of the stories that was told at the Acton Boxborough United Way Racial Justice Collaborative meeting where tenants came was that a report had been made, an order was given by the health inspector, but no follow-up was made. And we have a health director, we have 2 health inspectors and an administrative assistant, and they are responsible for all of these reports. They're responsible for the restaurants and the septic tanks and the cafeterias in the schools. There's just so much on their plate. I think that the town manager recently has done a great job reorganizing some of the divisions and departments at Town Hall as people retire, moving, shifting around responsibilities. So if we can do that without adding another position, that would be great, but we also might need to make some choices about getting the health department the staffing that it needs in order to respond to these issues. I think it would also help to clarify our policies or create new policies. So I have heard mentioned that sometimes landlords are informed that a tenant has asked for an inspection just out of common courtesy. And I don't feel that that's really in the best interest of the tenant and certainly not necessary. So only if a violation is found and an order needs to be made to remedy it within a certain amount of time is that really needed. So clarifying what is the process, what are our policies would be a step in the right direction. I also think that just like Jim mentioned, the language, barriers to understanding, we need to be providing tenants with information about their rights and how to go about getting the supports and the solutions that they need. every tenant should have access to that, and it's as easy as putting it on the website or sending it out possibly to new tenants. We might be able to create a policy whereby property owners, property managers are required to do an inspection for pests before a new tenant moves in, and if there's pests found, require mitigation within a certain amount of time. In terms of the composting and recycling, one of my favorite places in town is the Acton transfer station. I actually am a property owner, but I take my compost to the transfer station because I don't want to, oh my goodness, time's up. All right. Maybe I'll cover it in my closing statement.
As always, these questions could, go, there's plenty to talk about. In most forums, for folks who may or may not know, 1 to 2 minutes, lightning. So this is good to get some more thorough thinking about it. Next, do you think there is a way to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions from Acton's multifamily housing in a way that benefits residents as well as property owners? Alyssa.
I'll be quick. Yes, I do. I think that there are a lot of incentive programs that are available for property owners to take advantage of. The town has I don't remember the name of the program, but from the solar panels at the transfer station, which is one of my favorite places, we have a fund whereby we can get more energy efficient appliances. And I don't know if that's for private property owners or only for public housing, but there are other programs available to help property owners better insulate, get water saving devices, replace fixtures, and also, did I say better insulate? Yes, I think I did. This increases the value of the property, so it's a really good investment for the property owner. So if we can help with the funding through incentivizing those changes, I think that we can save money for the property owner, and we can also save money on the utilities for the tenant, and have a benefit of an increased property value for the owner.
Yes. There is an HCJA working group working on trying to understand how to get, for example, Mass Safe has a really good multifamily program, but it's very hard to navigate, and it requires cooperation from the landlord/condo board. And getting that cooperation is a challenge. You need informed residents, and you need a board or an owner that actually can think through the advantages of, having places to live that are better insulated and better air sealed. I think there's a role for the town to play in that, in mediating those relationships and getting all those incentives to work for residents of multifamily homes.
Thank you. I love the work that our sustainability director and a lot of the local groups, Mass Energize and also energizeacton.org, which everybody should check out, and Mothers Out Front and Green Acton. And we just have so many groups, including the Green Advisory Board within our own committee system, that is working on this. And one of the keys, the question is, do you think there's a way to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions from multi-family housing? Yes, there are many ways, but they are difficult to navigate. And I think a lot of the suggestions that Alyssa and Jim made were good. For solar energy, in addition to the program for low-income people to get solar, I think there are grants and rebates that would help the landlords of buildings get solar. And then, in addition to that, there are air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, and using some of that technology would allow the buildings themselves to emit less, and using insulation and all these other energy-saving devices would also decrease it. But another way that people who live in multifamily housing can reduce emissions is with better transportation. Transportation in Acton is more than 50% of our emissions. We go around in single people vehicles a lot, and we deliver things in these vehicles. And working together in traveling and in deliveries, especially in a building where you have all these people living in one place, is a way that emissions could be decreased. And of course, it's going to benefit everybody, because we have to make these changes in order to save our planet. So I didn't see what it said, but I'm stopping. Oh, 1 minute. Well, I'll stop anyway. I'm excited. I just would add that I'm excited about the community that is developed from working on all these issues, not only through these housing groups, but through other environmental groups in town. It's been a way that I've met so many people, mentors and friends, and I've had so much fun. You know, I remember marking the water drainage things to show where we drained our water. There have been all sorts of efforts over the years, tagging trees that were hurt by gas leaks, et cetera, et cetera. I think that these are projects that are healthful and that we can work on together as a community to make our lives better in more ways than just reducing the emissions.
We have 2 more prepared questions, so if anyone is thinking of a question that you haven't heard yet, but you still might, but you want to make sure it gets asked, I'd encourage you to jot it down on one of the cards and either raise your hand or bring it up to the front here. So, the next question. What steps will you take to support full funding for the capital and operating needs of the Acton Housing Authority's homes? Additionally, individuals and families who earn less than 30% of the average median income, some from Acton in our area, often wait on a waiting list for years. Some become homeless before they are eligible for public housing. Do you support A, increasing the rate in which we create new units of housing affordable for this population, and B, creating transitional housing or a homeless shelter in Acton for those who fall through the cracks? Jim.
I'm tempted to answer yes again, but there's actually some questions in there. So the funding for the Acton Housing Authority capital needs is done through a totally inadequate state allowance. The state has largely stepped back from the needs of affordable housing, maintaining existing affordable housing. So there's some statewide advocacy that needs to happen there to get those needs, increased. We have been able to take some steps, as Franny was alluding to, with our energy efficiency fund, replacing some of the out-of-date appliances with our energy efficiency fund, and that was a good move. But it's a little drop in the bucket compared to the millions of dollars of undone work across the portfolio of the Acton Housing Authority. Certainly, we need to create new units of housing affordable for this population, and I think a transitional housing would be a great idea. I think it's transitional housing is a broader umbrella than homeless shelter. I think in Acton, that's probably the kind of niche that we need filled. Thanks.
Yes, I think we have to more fully fund as a state, as a country, and in Acton where we can do through appropriations or fundraising or community preservation committee, which part of it goes to housing, increase the funding that goes to Acton Housing Authority. I sort of sorry to see, I mean, we had a motel that supported some of the transitional housing, but there were such unsafe situations going on. People weren't comfortable there, and I would like to see shelter for people that feel safe, where they're not shuttled off to the edge of town. Again, transportation is really important. You know, you've seen people walking along sides of roads or the side of Route 2, and it's just not good. It's not safe for them. So yes, I support that kind of housing. In terms of people who earn less than 30% of the average median income, that is really important. It is it's impossible to live here. And a lot of our programs do support people who earn 80% or 100% of median income. And that kind of middle-income housing is really important. And a lot of people who live in the 40B houses are people who earn less, and they have some of their rent paid for by other programs. I mean, even though they're 40B housing, I mean, they're 40B, I should just mention, can also include rental houses. It's not all purchased, but there's two types. I also think the housing trust that started to be developed, thank you to Tara and Alyssa and Charlie Kedlek for bringing that to the town. I think that's really important that we have a housing trust, and that's one way that we can support those people who earn less than 30%. I think it's either by rehabbing or by rental assistance, and also bringing the programs of rental assistance to people's awareness, the statewide programs. I think it's really important. And decreasing the paperwork. I mean, I see people spend so much of their time going through complicated applications. I mean, I'm not as good as doing applications as people are who have to apply for assistance. It's just a maze, and it's not good. So making things more efficient and less siloed would also help with that.
Thank you. I think that in addition to addressing the housing needs, the country, the state, the town needs to also think about addressing all of the issues that lead to people earning 30% or less. So I'm thinking universal preschool would allow parents to work who cannot if they have little ones at home. I'm thinking better public transportation, bike shares. You know, I know it's pretty snowy in Acton and New England, but you know, better public transportation so people can get to jobs and earn an income. So this is a bigger issue than just the availability of housing. I think that with the Acton Housing Authority's capital needs in particular, the select board can reach out to the state legislators who have already asked the select board to reach out to them whenever there's something that we need support with. And one of those changes that we can ask them to advocate for is the CPA, or the Community Preservation Act, restrictions on funding. So the Acton Housing Authority can actually not come to the Community Preservation Committee in Acton and ask for certain projects because they can only be funded, the funding can only be used for projects that were purchased or created with CPA funding. So we can change that because that's a serious, it's not a loophole, it's an oversight. It would be easier to maintain these projects if that funding was allowed to be spent on them. Definitely supportive of a homeless shelter. I'm thrilled that Concord's turned, with the state's help, Best Western into an emergency shelter for people who are unhoused. It's very close to Acton, and I think that our community can support those efforts, and I'd also welcome one in Acton. In terms of increasing the rate at which we create new units of of housing at this income level, I'm not sure whether that's possible. I'd absolutely be supportive of it, but the developments that are in progress right now, Tavernier Place on Mass Ave, $500 per unit, and these are, 1 and 2 bedroom units. The McManus Manor that will come on Main Street, the cost for each unit is $600. Sorry, I just said 600. I meant 500,000 and 600,000. So that's a very expensive way to get affordable housing, which is one of the reasons that I've been so passionate about working on this rehab housing trust, because the cost is much less to purchase these affordable, $200,000, spend $50,000, $60,000 to renovate them to standards of the state, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and deed restrict them and have them either under the Housing Authority or Rehab Trust or the Acton Community Housing Corporation. That's a way to get these affordable units at a more fiscally sustainable way.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
We have one over here, at least. I think there was one more question.
Okay. Yeah, there is one more question. I'm just,
I think I wrote a few wrong, so.
well, I'll do my best. Okay, all right. Okay. Recently, Boston has passed rent stabilization legislation, and today's Boston Globe again made the point that the rents in our region are high and rising, well beyond the reach of both low-income people and many moderate-income working people. Would you support the Select Board issuing a statement requesting our Massachusetts legislators to allow municipalities to institute rent control, and if allowed, would you support any form of rent control in Acton? Franny.
I have to say, I don't know. My guess is that I like rent control. I haven't studied the effects of rent control and how it's instituted, but I must say that the question of whether we would want to ask our legislators to allow municipalities to institute it, yes. I like when we recognize that communities all over Massachusetts are very varied. We're varied in how dense we are. We're varied in our socioeconomic status of the residents, in how much work there is in the community, whether people leave the community to work or they come to the community to work. There's so many ways that we vary, and the more that our individual municipalities can make these decisions themselves is important. There was a similar kind of decision about raising money with local initiatives to pay for transportation programs in local areas, and that's another one that I would support. So yes, I would support the Select Board issuing that kind of statement, and I do admit that I have to learn more about rent control and how it works, but it's when you live in an apartment and suddenly your rent can go up surprisingly and suddenly, and landlords can use it to try to get you to leave, it's stressful. People shouldn't have to live with that stress. So I think I've answered all the parts of that question. So thank you.
The traditional arguments against rent control are weak when you look at the actual facts. The traditional arguments include the notion that, landlords will stop investing in their apartments if if they can't, maximize their rents, and that developers will choose to avoid communities that have rent control to build new multifamily housing because they can't extract as much money as they might like to. So the fact is, though, any rent control legislation that managed to get through the state legislature would be relatively mild. No one's going to be required to roll back their rents. It would be starting at current rents and would control, how much they could go up with, I assume, a whole bunch of, protections and exceptions that would be, required by the forces that lobby for, apartment owners. So I think it'd be fine. I have no problem with Select Board issuing a statement like that and having us implement in Acton. I don't think it's going to be a, magic bullet, but it would be, we have so little influence over what actually happens with housing prices and rental prices that it'd be great to have a little bit of control.
Thank you. I'm also in support of a reasonable rent stabilization. I know of one story, I'm sure that there are many others, of a single mom who was living in a rental unit here in Acton last year, and her rent went from $1,800 a month to $2,400 a month in a single year. And that's a 50% increase, and there is no way that the cost to the property owner went up that much. I know everybody's electric bill went up, but I think that, we really need to call a spade and understand that sometimes it's just greed, and people who are living in housing need to be protected. And I'm assuming, I don't know very much about the math of this, but I'm assuming that there is a formula that can be applied to make sure that whatever limits on increases from year to year are reasonable for both the property owner and the tenant. So I would be in support of Acton sending a message to the state saying that we support this, and also implementing it here, as long as everything is reasonable and protects the interests of both landlords and tenants.
So we have several good questions here, and I will try to combine some because we're coming up to 90 minutes of this discussion, which, is I think it's a good amount. I'm trying to save myself too, So there's a couple of questions about what do you propose to help people who need housing now, like right this minute, and how many evictions has Acton had in recent past, which you might not know off the top of your head, but how should the town help evicted families and individuals? So this may be not the same people, it could be some of the same people, but people who suddenly find themselves in need of housing.
Can you read the first part of it again?
Sure. What do you propose to help people who need housing now, like immediately? Jim.
So our Human Services Department deals with this question a lot, and goes out to a wider and wider circle of support, both private programs and public programs, to try to find people emergency housing. They can usually do it, although it's not often convenient housing. Sometimes it's far away, but at least it's a start. In terms of the sort of the rash of evictions, the first thing that Acton did that was helpful in this was, have a rental support program. That was funded out of ARPA money, which is going to run out in a couple of years. So we're going to need to find a way of substituting for that. But the other thing that we should be doing is understanding the rhythm of evictions. So there's a I don't know, I hesitate to call it evil, but I find it evil. There's a rhythm of evictions that happens when apartment owners are getting close to the beginning of the school year and aren't able to fill their apartments. So they lower their standards for who to rent to, their financial standards, and bring in households, collect whatever rent they can, with the expectation that come the spring, they will start an eviction process. It's a rhythm that happens every year. It's awful. And we need to be able to anticipate that and stop it in the first place. And second of all, identify those households that are being put into those awkward positions of being, accepting housing for places that they can't really afford, and then not being able to afford it, and then getting kicked out. It's a really unhappy cycle that we need to figure out how to fix.
Thank you. This is a really tough question, and I appreciate it. In terms of providing housing for people who need housing immediately, I think that we've seen some examples of that recently where we were able to house families who were refugees. So we connected, and I'm not sure who the we is here, just want to be clear about that. Families were connected to housing either in this community or close by communities that was empty for one reason or another. I think we're all pretty cognizant that Acton does have a lot of households where the combined income is over $200,000 a year, and there are many reasons why housing might be empty. Somebody's living overseas for work, somebody's moved back home in order to care for an ailing parent, somebody owns 2 or 3 homes and they don't need them all. They can't occupy them all at the same time. So I think that I would need to figure out who that agency was that made those connections. And in terms of what Jim just mentioned about evictions and the cycle and the rhythm, I think that I don't know how to prevent that, but I certainly would seek out the answers from somebody who does know. So whether that is speaking with somebody at Regional Housing Services Office, or speaking with Town Council, or speaking with the Human Services and Social Services staff in the town to try and figure out what is the way that the local government could intervene in that situation to prevent those lowering of the financial standards. And certainly we need to continue the emergency rental assistance that the town has been engaged in for the last couple of years. And I think also having an advocacy program, whether it's within the town or a regional effort, would help with these issues as well.
Yes, it is a hard question. And if I get stressed out thinking about how to help someone who suddenly needs housing, think how much harder it is for them. I think the level of interest and help coming from volunteer groups, community groups, religious groups, civic organizations is really important. Knowing who to put people in touch with to find transitional housing suddenly is really important. And it's something that the town can provide backup, safety, and attention to. It's important to know that your town is behind you. I think when someone has a sudden need and they're looking, every once in a while I hear, often it comes through my kids, it might be somebody from the city, it might be somebody who's a refugee, they suddenly need a place to stay. And if I, as a homeowner, knew that the town were involved and the social service department, I would feel more safer opening my home to people who I don't know suddenly want a place to stay. And I think that it's something that's hard for people to do, is suddenly say, okay, somebody needs a place to stay, I'll open my homes. And people do it all the time, as Alyssa said, for immigrant groups. But people have been doing it for people with domestic violence in their household. All sorts of reasons people suddenly can't live where they live. And if we could help them and we didn't feel like we were alone helping, like, I think one of the fears people have in helping suddenly is, will I be asked too much? And if we really felt that we were all in this together, I think we would more willingly open our doors and also find other people to help. I've noticed, not just in the area of housing, but people have to leave town, as Jim said, leave town to go stay in a temporary housing situation. That's really not easy. To get drug treatment, I remember meeting a guy who would use our Crosstown Connect every day to go to the train, to go to Cambridge, to get his Suboxone treatment. And what a shame he had to spend all his time going to get this treatment just to stay healthy. So finding local solutions, I think, is important, both for the evictions and for people who suddenly need a place to stay. Thanks.
Okay, I think this will be our last question. You've touched on many of the subjects in the other questions, if not answered them directly. And I know people can always follow up in person, email, all that sort of stuff. So how would each of you prioritize equity and justice, even when it's not popular and people call it divisive, especially among folks who have been in government for a while or are just really connected? I hope that makes sense as a question.
Can you repeat it?
Sure. How would each of you, and this is, I think this is more just kind of like a broad question as well. How would each of you prioritize equity and justice, even when it's not popular and people call it divisive, especially among folks who have been in government for a while or just are really socially connected, socially and politically connected? Alyssa.
Thank you. So I have been working for quite a while now, I can't tell you how long, with a program that was started by the Acton Boxborough United Way Racial Justice Collaborative. It's called Community Circles, and we meet monthly at the library, and we deliberately reached out to folks from across the political spectrum, and a community circle is a very structured conversation where rather than having a dialogue, we are all in turn responding to a series of prompts. And the point of the program, it's founded in, now I am forgetting the word, restorative justice. It's founded in restorative justice practices, and it's helping the participants develop communication skills, listening skills, also being vulnerable, feeling safe to share stories of their own personal experiences and viewpoints from their heart. And we have discussed in some of the circles the need and also the wonder that it would be if we brought that to, if we scaled it up, if we brought it to the larger community and held some sort of forum, seminar, panel discussion where we have a bigger group of people, because these are attended by, 8, 10 people, because it takes a long time to listen to everybody share a story. So I would continue with that. One very divisive issue that I'm sure most people here are aware of is the mascot retirement that happened a couple of years ago, and folks didn't feel like the process was sufficient, that they weren't listened to. So I helped organize through a national organization, Braver Angels, a debate, and it happened on Zoom instead of in person, but that's what we were doing then. And I think it was really helpful. We couldn't go back to the school committee and ask them to revisit their decision or change their mind, but, the divisiveness continued for quite some time, and I think the community really need to have a conversation about that. And we need to have a conversation about a lot of things in town. So I think this format, this structured conversation is a good way to go about doing that.
So how I would prioritize equity and justice? I think equity and justice defines most of what I work for on a daily schedule, daily habit. Being on the Commission on Disabilities, I think it's really important to recognize the differences that we have amongst us in our town and also in our own lives as time goes on. We all experience some period where we have a disability. In terms of housing, I think it's really important to face that. There are a lot of aging parents who have adult children with intellectual disabilities, and they worry about what's going to happen and how is this program going to continue, and can my child live on their own? And some of our housing that we're building does address that. I think we really have to be creative with those solutions. We have to be open and listening and supportive of people who experience racial discrimination and other kinds of discrimination for any kind of difference. I think we need to study each other's culture and language. We have a lot of newcomers who bring such amazing values and habits, let alone experiences that can be learned from, and vice versa. I mean, I think of two examples. The Chinese community needed to learn, some of the people, how to use their ovens, because they didn't use ovens in a lot of the homes that they had come from. And a simple thing like having Wei-Yin Sun in the health department, being able to interpret and being able to have an event where people came and learned how to use an oven. It was just such a simple but sociable, fun thing. And cultural education, having a space for sharing of culture. All these are ways that we can see each other, listen to each other, and make sure that we know what other people are suffering from, so that we can make a difference. Thanks.
So people that volunteer for town committees or they're on boards, these are people with, the time and the privilege to be able to do all that. So we tend to be a relatively, affluent group of people, relatively well-educated. And on the other hand, we're also we could do a lot of things with our time, and we're choosing to do service. So when I think about, how do you make sure that values of equity and justice are part of that culture? I think on the one hand, we're ready to learn. We're interested in that. We want that. But on the other hand, we may be limited by our experience to, dealing with a lot of people who are very similar to who we are. And that's a limitation. But there's a couple of ways to work with that. One is that as boards and committees, we get to meet with a lot of different people from different parts of town with different values, different ideas, different goals. And if we come at that with an attitude of humility and listening and learning, we grow. I know that that's been true for me and for a lot of the former select board people that I've gotten to know over the years, that they've been really changed by, this wonderful excuse to get to know lots of different kinds of people. The other thing I think of is that, there's room for some, professional learning. Now that we actually have a DEI director, we can have, really good, effective education on some of these topics. And the staff have done some of that over the years and have invited committee members to attend. I'm not sure that education has been the most well-designed, but I know there are many good teachers out there who could, help people who want to learn, learn.
Before we go to closing, I do want to first of all thank all the candidates for participating this evening, and for all of you for coming out, and for anyone who's watching this now or later on TV. Just a reminder, the election, or to vote by next Tuesday, you can vote before that, but if you choose to vote in person, that is only at the junior high now on Tuesday. And I invite you to come and participate at town meeting, May 1st and 2nd for sure. We'll see after that. And it's relatively easy to be a member of town meeting. Be a registered voter and show up. If you need a ride, there's a number to call, which I did not write down, but it's right front and center on the town website. It is getting passed around, I've noticed, on Facebook and such. So if you, anyone who does need a ride, and they will bring you home, both directions, you do need to call by next Friday, I think that's the 28th, by noontime on Friday, so that they can get that all scheduled, so that Crosstown Connect can take care of that. So with that, closing statements, 2 minutes, please, slightly shorter. Starting with Jim.
This has been a wonderful event. Thanks so much for putting it together. It's been both terrifying in anticipation and really easy and fun in the actual, the actual event itself. A couple of things I guess I would close with. We're entering a period financially in the town of Acton where things are going to get a little squeezed. We've enjoyed the benefit of a lot of ARPA funds for the last few years, and that's going to continue for another couple of years. But when that goes away, we're going to be entering the squeeze that we enter every decade or so, where the costs of all of our wonderful staff are going up at a reasonable rate, and we are only allowed to raise the taxes, 2.5% a year, which is, less than the kind of raises we should be giving people and are giving people. So we're going to be entering a period of hard choices, and eventually we'll be having a conversation about an operating override. But in the meantime, because the operating override's not happening anytime real soon, we need to understand that, we've all said a lot of things tonight about all the things we support, and that when it gets down to it, we're going to be having to make tough choices about what's important. And for me, serving people that have been underserved is a priority. I don't know where I go to what we spend money on now and say, oh, well, let's spend less on that. So it's going to be a challenge. The town's done a good job at doing, applying for grants, which is going to help with some of this. But at some point, that reaches a limit too. So I guess as a plea for gentleness as we, make tricky choices and difficult choices. We'll be listening to all of you. We'll want to hear your priorities so that we can make the choices we need to in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. By the way, the number to call is 978-844-6809 for the dispatcher to arrange rides. And don't feel like you have to be stuck. I believe that the driver, they definitely hang around during town meeting, and if you had to go home at 8:30, and I think they can help you. If they don't, then come find me, because I misinformed you, and I'll drive you home. In terms of housing, I think that the important thing is to keep people in town and welcome them to town. I think it's important for us to find ways to help seniors who are now on a limited budget to stay in town. They have a perspective, and they have been here for a long time, and I don't want them to feel like, these taxes are just getting too much, I need to leave. That's really depressing, and it's a loss for all of us. I also don't like when I hear people talk about families. It's even illegal, but people, try to say, I don't want more families for the schools. That's one of the things that makes our young families, is what makes our town valuable in some ways. The school system, the economic development that's happened and continues to improve. I think there's a lot of ways that we need to. I'm glad there is an article on the town meeting warrant about economic development. So all of these people, it's really important to support. It's important to make sure that somebody who has a disability doesn't think, oh, I'd better move into the city where there's better sidewalks and where there's better transportation. We want to be the town that welcomes and keeps people here. I also, in becoming a select board member, I would say that I'm very inspired by the select board members and the planning board members that I work with from around the state. I vice chair the MAGIC, it's called MAGIC, sub-region. It's 13 towns around here that looks at planning issues. And I find that, in particular, there have been a lot of women select board members that I've been working with recently, and I just got really inspired. I got inspired to come back and serve again, and be part of not just our town, because nothing in what we suffer and enjoy stops at the town borders, but in our whole region. Thanks.
Thank you. So the subtitle of this housing forum was, or tagline was, to come learn from the candidates how they hope to make Acton more inclusive. And I've been thinking about what that means, what inclusion means. And building a lot more housing is not going to make us an inclusive community. We do need housing, but in order to be a more inclusive community, we not only need to address socioeconomic diversity with affordable housing, but we need to make more efforts to be a more inclusive community for all the ways that we're different, whether it's marital status, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's race, whether it's religion, whether it's immigration status, language proficiency. So I just wanted to bring up that point that the select board members need, and all of the town officials and board and committee volunteers need to be working to make the town more inclusive in those ways. And I was thinking of it because of the final tough question about social justice and equity. In terms of housing specifically, I think that what we mentioned earlier, the variety of different tools that we have to make sure that we have diverse housing stock that serves the needs of all different people, that we have plenty of group homes for those adult children with disabilities when their parents are no longer able to care for them. I just attended at the senior center this afternoon a workshop on home sharing, which is something that I did in order to get by in college, after college, sharing with, a home, either renting or purchasing with one of my siblings. 1, 2, 3 different people in the house. So I think we can get creative with things like accessory dwelling units. I'm happy that the town has that zoning and that we just improved it last year at town meeting. We can get creative with reuse of buildings. There's a lot of companies that have pivoted to completely remote, so we have empty office buildings, as well as rehabbing our naturally affordable condos and apartments. So I think we need to use all of these tools at our disposal in order to not only make sure that people can afford to live in town, can afford to stay in town as they age, but also that we are a truly inclusive community. Thanks. And thank you, everybody, for organizing and attending.
And I believe that concludes this evening's events.